Welcome to Practical Magic, Tarot 101. I'm Sable Aradia. In this class, we're going to go over some of the basics about tarot, including selecting your first tarot deck, the meanings of the major and minor arcana, and then we're going to show you a couple of layouts and give you some advice on reading tarot professionally or semi-professionally. So when people come to you for a tarot reading, what they're really looking for is advice. But you shouldn't really give them advice. You are an interpreter of the symbols on the cards and how they all fit together. That's what a tarot layout is about. So you need to encourage them to make their own decisions. You should be able to get a general idea of what the future might hold for them based on your intuition. Some people will want you to prove your psychic ability to them, so they aren't going to tell you anything. In which case I would say, well, I'd say what I say when people tell me that, which is that I should be able to figure out the general gist of what you're trying to ask by what appears in the cards. But if you want more specific information, it may help to tell me something about it. Make people feel comfortable, make sure they're relaxed. A lot of people are nervous. They're going to tell you some very personal information. It's not uncommon for people to burst into tears based on something that you see in the cards and pointing it out. And people should feel comfortable to do that. The most common question you're going to get asked about is probably love, right? Is this romance going to work out? And then the next most common question is money. People are going to want to know about their finances. Understanding that if you're totally at a loss, you might want to present those as an option. Now the first layout I'm going to show you is called the Celtic Cross layout, and this is probably the most common tarot layout. Now there's a bunch of different ways to do it. Some people do it with a card representing the seeker in the middle. Some people don't. People have different ways of choosing that, especially the way things are laid out front to back can be different. It's the same general idea. I'll tell you how I read it, and perhaps I'll look up and suggest some other options when I put the DVD together. So the first thing I generally do is I find a card, one of the court cards, to signify the person that I'm doing the reading for. In this case, one of the first court cards I came across was the King of Swords. So how do you select this? Well, now my husband, who's been doing readings for quite a lot of years, tells me that part of his personality, the meanings of the cards have already been laid out to you by this point, so I'm not going to repeat that. But part of it is also features. Air people, sword people, tend to have dark hair, pale complexions, and blue or green eyes. Pentacles people tend to be darker complexioned, have brown eyes. Wands people tend to be... What are the Wands people? Wands people are I think the redheads and blondes, right? And the Cups people, find a cup here, I don't know what I'm talking about. As we wait and fill the blank space, but Cups people are also rather fair, not as fair as the Wands people. So, different examples. A good deck will show you these physical features, so you can generally guess. Ultimately, I'd say it's guided by intuition. So, yes, Wands people. Or Cups people, sorry. I should put a pentacle in there too, shouldn't I? No, can't see that person's features. So my deck is the Robin Wood Tarot deck. There we go. There's a pentacle person. which is basically like the standard Rider-Waite deck, except that it's got a lot of specifically Wiccan symbolism that I resonate with. I like it because it's easy to read and because the symbols speak to me. Now, if I were doing the reading, I would start with, say I'd selected the King of Swords for this person. So, I would select a King of Swords if I felt that the person was mature, so a mature male, right? If he were very direct in his manner, perhaps he might be seeming to hold back anger or be very active physically. He would also be rather bright. He would use larger words when he was speaking to me. And that's why I would select that. So, then you shuffle the deck. Now, some people say you shouldn't shuffle it like a deck of cards. If you're going to read reversed cards, then it doesn't matter. But if you're not, then definitely you shouldn't do that. And if you are going to choose to reverse cards in the deck, you should be aware that you're doing that and why you're doing it. Now, what I generally do is I ask my client to split the deck 3 times with their non-dominant hand. That's because that's the receptive hand. If they're left-handed, they use their right. If they're right-handed, they use their left. Generally, I end up with 3 piles, like so. Then I'll ask them which one feels like the right one to them. And in this case, we'll say this one. I put it together like this. Because it was facing them, I turn it around so that it's facing me. That's just the way I do it. There's no real reason you have to do it that way. And then I lay it out. What covers you? This is what is your aid in the situation. What crosses you? That works against you. What's behind you? Something in the past that has relevance to whatever it is that your client is asking. It doesn't have to be recent past. It can be a fairly long time ago. Often I find that childhood issues come up in this place. The foundation, or what's beneath you, it's sort of the root of the question. It's also a subconscious influence on the question. What's before you? This is sort of immediate future. And what's above you? I interpret that as kind of the weather around the situation. It's also sort of the environment under which this whole situation is taking place. These 2 cards are connected. So if this is unclear, or if somebody says, well, I don't understand what that could refer to, then look to this card for clarity. And these 2 cards are connected. So again, same idea. Then in the line, self, environment, hopes and fears, final outcome. Now, generally I start by looking at the whole layout and seeing if anything screams out to me that it's significant. If I see a lot of the major arcana, then I generally take that as a sign that this reading is very important to this person. This is a turning point in their life, and they really want this information, and their decision is going to affect the course of their life over the next little while. So here we've got a couple of major arcana in our hypothetical reading. Minor arcana, as I've said, are more specific. They're less than the big human questions represented by the major arcana, and easier to change. So, now, what covers a person is their strength in the situation. You have to kind of, I generally start here. I read outward like this. I read up like that. And then I try to put it all together. Because, of course, one card by itself in one position doesn't necessarily mean a specific thing. It can be modified by the cards around it. So it really is a matter of trying to feel how it all works together in a puzzle. Now, what covers him, what crosses him? This is generally, the left-hand side here is where I read the top of this card. Different books will tell you to do it different ways. So the right-hand side is the bottom. I do read reversed meanings when I do readings, so I would say that this card would therefore be reversed. In our hypothetical reading, a possible meaning for this card could suggest that the person's strength is his ability to pull his family together emotionally. Remember that the Ten of Cups is about family love. And I would say that his weakness, what works against him, what crosses him, is that the High Priestess is about your intuition and trusting in it. Since it's reversed, says there's difficulty with that, so he's not very good at trusting his intuition and his feelings on the subject. What's behind him? What's beneath him? What's ahead of him? What's above him? Now, again, when reading this card, it doesn't have to be something that is in the immediate past. People will ask you about that. I get asked that all the time, but it is something that has a direct bearing. Like I said, childhood issues tend to come up in this spot a great deal. In this case, we have the Queen of Swords. Now, of course, your court cards represent people generally. So this is some Queen of Swords personality in our hypothetical person's life. Maybe his mother, maybe a past girlfriend or an ex-wife, somebody that is affecting the situation. Right? The foundation of the question can sometimes be confusing. If you read it as a subconscious influence, it's a lot easier. You may want clarification of any of these. If something specifically confuses you, it's okay to draw a card and ask it to be clarified. Well, what does this mean? And then hopefully this extra card will give you some insight. What's ahead of you is generally something fairly near future. It won't be any farther than a couple of months or so. It's sort of, this is where you're headed immediately. And what's above you is sort of the general, like I said, sort of the weather or the environment in which this whole situation is happening. In our hypothetical reading here, this could easily be interpreted as this gentleman is having difficulties in his marriage, right? Like this would be a typical reading that way, because he's worried about getting along with his family, he's not trusting his intuition, right? There's somebody in the past who has a swords type personality who is affecting the situation. Right? This is sort of a general state of confusion that is beginning to sort itself out. This is that whole love and partnership thing. That being a page could refer to, I don't know, it's a young person or a young at heart person. It's another thing. Don't get caught up too much on the age of the court cards. They're symbols, remember. So it's who you are inside, it's not who you are outside. Self, environment, hopes and fears, final outcome. Self, this is sort of your insight into yourself, something about the person who is asking for the reading that they may not have thought of or they don't realize. So it's usually something that when you say, well, could it be like this, right? Well, could it be... Judgment in this deck, the phoenix rising from the cauldron here, right, is about, overcoming, rising from the ashes. This was reversed. Says there's difficulty with that. So I would say that this person tends to be fatalistic and they shoot themselves in the foot before they're ready to actually succeed, and they're their own worst critic, right? Environment. This card really could be anything. It's difficult to interpret. Usually by the time you get here, you have a general idea, though. You may have to ask for clarification. I don't know. I think I'm going into too much about the meanings of the cards, but I'm trying to give you an idea of how you would interpret this all together. You already by this time should know the basic card meanings, so this would give you an idea of how it all fits into a specific pattern. Right. In this reading, I would say environment, this person is planning on traveling or maybe finding a different avenue of work, or, you know, making a big change, right? Waiting for the ships to come in. That's another thing too. So maybe there's something they're waiting for, it hasn't happened yet. That has a bearing on the situation. Hopes and fears are important, not in what this specifically represents, but this is what I generally say. If it turns out to be something that can be interpreted as a hope, then you probably can expect it to be realized, because hope springs eternal. But if it's something that turns out to be a fear, odds are good it's just that. It's just a fear. It doesn't necessarily mean it won't happen, but it means you're probably worrying about it too much. So that's what I tend to see as that, because if it weren't just a fear, it wouldn't be there. And the final outcome sort of ties everything together. Again, often this card will require some clarification. But come back to what's before you if you find this really confusing, and then after you're done that, draw a clarifying card. And that is the basics of how you interpret a Celtic Cross reading.